Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss whether Rishi Sunak may actually end up drawing attention to the one thing he's actually achieved as Prime Minister as a result of strike action in Northern Ireland this week. The strike by port inspectors may actually show the benefits of his Windsor Framework deal. Mind you, there is a sting in the tail as well. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So last week, for the first anniversary of Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister, he released a short video which purported to show his achievements. In reality, almost none of them were achievements. Many of them were things that he hadn't actually done, so weren't achievements. Some were listings of legislation. Now, passing legislation is not an achievement when you have a majority, so the achievement needs to be in how it's made people's lives better. This was noticeably absent from the video. But there was an achievement in there, glinting like a needle in a haystack. The Windsor Framework. In reality, the achievement was not so much agreeing it with the EU as getting his party to agree that threatening war with France wasn't really getting us anywhere, and that we needed to actually engage with the EU Commission. But an achievement is an achievement, and this week he may even be able to point to a somewhat dubious benefit. As a result of the agreement, we no longer need full checks at the border in the Irish Sea that Boris Johnson denied existed, even though it was written down in his deal. As long as certain goods being exported from Britain to Northern Ireland are only going to be sold in Northern Ireland and there are measures in place, including the not for EU labelling, then they can pass through the green lane. Anything which is either destined for the rest of Ireland or there's nothing in place to stop it being sold in the rest of Ireland has to pass through the red lane. The red lane means those full checks. Well, this week, starting today, in fact, a strike of port inspectors. It's going to last all week as well. 260 vets and phytosanitary inspectors are the latest group of workers to be unhappy with real terms pay cuts. Made all the more noticeable for them because their colleagues in the rest of Ireland are getting way better pay for the same work. So another strike for the government to deal with. Shame there isn't a government in Northern Ireland to deal with it. But the strike highlights three things. One, which Rishi Sunak may want to elbow his more rebellious MPs about, and two, which few Tory MPs will want to talk about. So the first consequence of this strike is that it will highlight in a very obvious way the difference between the red and green lanes. Goods passing through the green lane will just carry on as normal. They're completely unaffected by the strike. The goods which need to pass through the red lane are going to be noticeably absent from the shelves of Belfast and be widely reported. Goods passing through the green lane, absolutely fine. This will presumably allow Sunak to say so to his MPs. Oh, look, imagine if I were still picking fights with the EU and didn't have this deal in place, because then everything would be on the red lane. The shortages could be catastrophic. Perhaps some Brexit ultras will say, well, we would just have to suspend all the checks for the duration. But I think most Tory MPs are grounded enough to realise that that is not a feasible plan. After all, they approved of the framework, so they must have seen the benefits in coming to a working arrangement with the EU. However, there are two further things that this week is likely to highlight, which might be less comfortable for Tory MPs and Rishi Sunak. The first is just how disruptive to trade a strike of port inspectors is going to be. Now, we don't have standard checks on EU imports into Britain, meaning that our border is genuinely wide open, but not in a way that the Brexit commentariat ever talk about. However, there are plans to start introducing these in the new year. At last. Remains to be seen whether they will finally do so because they've already delayed them 4 or 5 times. The checks we are proposing are much weaker than the reciprocal arrangements on our exports to the EU. But even the ones we're proposing would mean a shortage of some goods in the UK, even when it's all working fine. But imagine what would happen if the standards checks are implemented, as currently planned, and it's all sort of working. The Tories are gearing up for the election because they're leaving it late, right? Then a strike of vets takes place. Ooh, not sure the Tories will relish the prospect of sudden shortages on the shelves as they get to the point where they're forced to begin the election campaign because they've left it until the last minute. I wonder if any Tory MPs are going to consider this week's strike in Northern Ireland in terms of how it might affect Britain if replicated after our imports checks come online. But this week's strike will also highlight something else. Sunak will be able to point to the goods flowing easily across the green lane as an achievement which would not have occurred under Boris Johnson. However, the rest of us, including the Labour Party, will be able to say, yes, but what about all the goods in the red lane? If only everything was in the green lane, then we wouldn't be dealing with shortages at all. Many of the affected goods will have to be diverted to Irish ports. Now, that means the transportation of these goods will take longer and be more expensive. That is time and expense as a result of the extreme Tory Brexit. Not the strike, the Brexit. Labour say they want a veterinary agreement with the EU. Well, they could use this week's strikes as a way of highlighting the benefits of their policy. And the beauty of this is they don't have to make a fuss about it this week. The records of the disruption that this will cause can be used whenever they like, including in the election campaign if some journalist insists on talking about Brexit. And as for those of us not at all coy about pointing out the damaging impacts of Brexit, this is a big one. Like, we're already used to the idea that whenever there's a bad harvest anywhere in Europe or North Africa, we instantly get shortages on the shelves not seen elsewhere in Europe. That is because we are so much more difficult to trade with that we get left until last in the supply chain. So if there's a shortage, we get the shortages first. But this is a new one. It highlights an extra link in the supply chain, one that if it fails, ushers in massive shortages. It's Northern Ireland who will be suffering the consequences of Brexit this week, although it could in theory affect some reverse trade indirectly. But if the same things happen once we've implemented our own Brexit import checks, then we're going to have another source of shortages waiting in the wings. So it might be good and bad for Sunak. The strikes will show that the situation would have been way worse without his Windsor Framework, but also that it would have been way better if we had a closer trade agreement with the EU, or better still, no Brexit at all. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.